Heston Blumenthal described the 70s as the decade that good food forgot. And it's worth stopping here and thinking of the culinary journey that I've been on so far. From the 1900s, where everything had to be made from hand and one soup took 4 hours. Through the war and rationing, where everything is still being made by hand, but the timings have cut down because you're not going to spend hours and hours on a dinner when your home could be bombed out before tea time. And so to the 70s, where, in the course of my research, it seems that everything needs to be served on cocktail sticks or in animal-shaped moulds. It is the decade of brown. Brown clothing, brown wallpaper, brown food. Well, brown or worrying shades of pink and orange. As we say hello to Strawberry Angel Delight and the delights of chicken tikka masala. So grit your teeth and buckle up, or don't, because you don't actually have to wear your seatbelt in this decade, and join me as I taste the culinary delights of the 1970s. Welcome to the 1970s, the first decade that I am genuinely, truly a little bit nervous about. Not because I think it is going to taste absolutely awful, but because I think it's the first decade that lots of people will remember from their childhood and will want to tell me if I get anything wrong. And hey, I get it. I'm really not looking forward to butchering the 90s either, which is my childhood, but I didn't think about that when I started this series, and now we're too late, so what are you going to do? I do have to say, in favour of the 70s, that it seems like my decade in terms of fashion. I mean, it's lovely, at the start at least, lovely floaty dresses and just brush it and go hair, which is kind of the style that I would go for anyway. So no more pinning it up into lovely swirls a la 1930s or precarious bobs a la 1920s, which I've really struggled with over the course of this series. This has been the quickest that I've got ready because everything is stuff that I would already own and already wear. I don't know what that says about me, so. But if you're an actual child of the 1970s, you're probably more interested in the toys than the clothes. So you might have had a stylophone, or a space hopper, or if your parents didn't value your life very much, you might have had clackers, you know, those things that go around and smash into your eyes. And while you were playing with your new toys, your parents, or let's be honest, still the women in your life, were playing with their new toys. By which I mean fridge freezers. Less than 10% of people owned a freezer in 1969, but 10 years later at the end of the 70s, over half of the population did. It heralded a new age for convenience cooking. Finder's crispy pancakes, which were these savoury pancakes filled with lava, and Vesta crispy chicken chow mein. Seems that crispy was the 70s word for sophisticated. And what else a pudding but a frozen Black Forest Gatto. This was also a decade for snacking, in a way that perhaps we hadn't had snacking previously. Golden Wonder produced salt and vinegar flavour Rock and Roller crisps, which ended up being discontinued in the 80s. A more lasting snack was found in hula hoops, which were introduced in 1973. In fact, so wondrous were these new crispy inventions that a kind of novelty cookbook called Cooking with Crisps was released in this decade. And for those with a sweet tooth, Cadbury's had an array of delights on the horizon as well. The Curly Whirly was invented, as well as the Double Decker. These snacks were aimed at children, coming home from a day at school, hungry and letting themselves into an empty house. By 1975, approximately 57% of women from the ages of 25 to 54 were in some kind of work, and this meant that they weren't at home to greet their little darlings when their little darlings came home from school. So they had to fend for themselves. But with more adults in work came a rise in hospitality, and the 70s was truly the era of the dinner party. If you haven't already seen online, go and search 70s dinner party on Twitter or the internet, like a true 70s person, the internet, and go and search 70s dinner parties so that you can see some truly upsetting examples of 70s meals that you can recreate for the people that you hate in your life. The dinner party was like a relaxed, casual affair. Invitations would be sent out usually to 4 or 6 guests to ensure that there was even numbers for the game of charades or whatever after the dinner. But it was still quite kind of a formal, relaxed affair. So there was lots of kind of platter sharing, cheese fondue, things like that. They've come a long way since the Escoffier 3-course menu, sitting at a table with your place name. It's a lot more casual than it was at the start of this century. And what else might be served at a 70s dinner party when you're trying to impress and awe your guests? Only the most exciting, exotic ingredients, the most new and inventive meals. Spag bowl. I'm being facetious, of course. People in the 70s did know what pasta was, but still, spaghetti bolognese was a brand new thing. It was something that was sophisticated and showed that you were interested in new things, rather than what it is in my house, which is a midweek, bung it in a pot, add in some vegetables of dubious freshness, but it doesn't matter, chop them up and add some sauce because no one's going to notice a slightly sad aubergine once they're eating it, and get it down as fast as you can with as much cheese as you can. Spag bowl was a lot more grand and, I guess, special than it is now. So the 70s is easy to laugh at, and I have laughed at this while I've been researching it. But I think to just see it as this slightly awkward, weird blip after the 60s and before the 80s is kind of to do it a bit of an injustice. You need to see it in its own context. The 70s are often seen as the end of the 60s, which are, I think, overly glamorised in my opinion. And therefore, because it's seen as the end as if very, very new and exciting decade, it always looks a bit sad and embarrassing in comparison. And when coupled with the dire economic situation, the power outages, the 3-day working week, the massive bailouts from the IMF, Jim Callaghan, a future Prime Minister, saying that he would rather emigrate than stay in Britain, it is easy to see it as something that is the end of something great. But actually we should be looking at it as the beginning of something new, and the 70s is admittedly a rather difficult birth for that beginning, but it is a beginning of something new and inventive. And the food reflects this dawning of a new age. The brown ready meals aren't brown and convenient because they reflect a drop in standards from the 60s. They're brown and convenient because actually mum is at work, and when she gets home at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday weekday, she's not going to want to start cooking from scratch a 3-course meal. So bung this in the oven, turn the TV on and pull the sofa up a little bit closer and crack on. A gaggle of giggling friends trying not to flick spaghetti sauce onto the shag pile carpet isn't just sweet and slightly awkward and embarrassing. It's also indicative of an age where people are experimenting more freely and more open to trying new things. That said, some stereotypes are there for a reason, and when I was flicking through the cookbook I'm using today, the Hamlyn All Colour Cookbook, which I think was one of Mary Berry's first books that she put out, I was horrified by some of the things that I saw. So the experiments that I'm doing today are not based on any particular menu, they're just things that I was flicking through and was very, very intrigued by. So I'm starting with a 70s classic of Aspic, and I'm continuing with Aspic, and then I'm finishing for dessert with pasta. Wish me luck, and I hope that you enjoy the 1970s. To make chicken aspic tower, you will need half a tablespoon of dry sherry, 200 ml boiling water, half a packet of aspic, 70 grams mixed frozen vegetables, 1 diced cooked chicken breast, a handful of radishes, 1 chicken stock cube. Top and tail all of the radishes, then set 4 aside. Slice the rest of the radishes very thinly. Take the 4 unsliced radishes and turn them into flowers by slicing 4 ways across them, but be careful not to cut all the way through. Place them into a bowl of cold water and they will open fully after half an hour. Add the frozen veg to a pan and cook for a few minutes. Add the sliced radishes to the vegetables and cook. Dissolve the stock cube in the boiling water and add the aspic. Add the sherry and stir well. Pour about 1 centimetre of aspic into 4 grease moulds and chill until set. Add the diced chicken and cooked veg to the remaining aspic and then spoon into the 4 moulds on top of the already set aspic base. Turn out by sliding a very thin knife round the moulds and top with the radish flowers. Let's just get this over with, shall we? When I was growing up, we had cats, and I'm fairly sure that we used to feed them something that wasn't 1,000 miles away from this. I've made 4 because that's really the quantity of aspic that I had, but I don't think I'll be eating all 4. In terms of flavour, it's actually fine. It's quite salty, and I guess it depends how well you season the chicken that you're using. Obviously, I was using a leftover chicken breast from a dinner that we'd had the night before, and I'd seasoned it quite nicely, so it tastes fine. If you don't season your chicken breast, it's going to be fairly bland, but it's not dreadful. The flavour's fine. The flavour is decent. It's just chicken. The texture is the problem. It's quite slimy. It's very cold. Obviously, it's been kept in the fridge, so it's a very unpleasant. I can't really describe it. You kind of bite through this soft, slightly rubbery jelly, and you're not biting anything, your teeth aren't connecting with anything, and then you get to the chicken, and that's what you're chewing. But while you're chewing it, the jelly's like oozing and squeezing through your teeth. It's not a texture that I've instantly fallen in love with. The flavour's fine, the texture. So let's hope. Again, I feel like I'm always saying this. Let's hope that the main is better. To make salmon chaud-froid, you will need 2 salmon fillets, 200 ml boiling water, 200 ml mayonnaise, half a red pepper, sprigs of watercress, a few capers, the juice of 1 lemon, half a packet of aspic, 15 grams of breadcrumbs, half a lettuce. Steam the salmon for 8 to 10 minutes until cooked through and tender. Add the lemon juice to the breadcrumbs and mix until combined into a grainy thick paste. Melt the aspic in the boiling water and stir thoroughly. Take the salmon out and remove the skin. When cool, carefully make a slit in the side of the salmon and spoon in the lemon and breadcrumb mixture, filling it as fully as you can without splitting the fish. Pour the liquid aspic over the mayonnaise and combine. Once the mayo and aspic mixture has begun to thicken, pour it over the fish and leave it to set. Catch any excess on a plate and re-pour over. Slice the pepper into thin strips and arrange delicately over the salmon. Dot capers in between the pepper slices and arrange the fish on a dish of shredded lettuce and watercress sprigs. Serve chilled. Have you ever seen a more 70s presentation than this? Salmon with capers, mayonnaise, and then sliced bits of red pepper on top. I'm going to start by taking a bit from the middle because I think that's where the bulk of this kind of lemony breadcrumb filling will have ended up. And I have to say, I have actually never had salmon with mayonnaise before. So again, something to look forward to. Oh, that's fine, actually. Yeah, that's actually fine. The mayonnaise, you don't really notice it. It's kind of like a creamy, slightly soury because of the capers on top and things like that. Slightly sour, which actually does go quite nicely with the salmon, so you don't really notice that. That's not a big thing. The aspic has got a bit of a salty kick, I suppose, but again, that just is salt, isn't it? So that bit is fine. The salmon has been steamed very nicely, so it's still tender, it's not rubbery, it's not chewy. Good. The breadcrumb filling is a little bit disappointing because it's just kind of watery and soggy. It's not a crunchy filling or anything like that. So That's maybe a little bit underwhelming, if anything. You know, it's got a citrusy hit, it has got the lemon flavour coming through, but it's like a sponge almost. It's like you get through the salmon and that's absolutely fine, you know what to expect, and then there's a bit of a spongy, lemony flavour that you can't really identify in your mouth what it is. So that's the only odd thing about this meal. That is fine, and I will eat that. Like, if you're going out, if you're having... But I mean, it's an effort. I wouldn't present it like this, and I would change the filling if I was going to do this again. But it is not inedible. It is actually okay. On to dessert. To make chocolate shell pasta, you will need 285 ml of whole milk, 1 tablespoon of soft brown sugar, 55 grams of caster sugar, 1 egg, 15 grams of cocoa powder, 55 grams of shell pasta. Cook the pasta in the milk for about 15 minutes or until soft. Bring the pasta to a boil and then cook it on simmer for a few minutes. Add the brown sugar and cocoa and stir until dissolved. Separate the egg yolk from the white and add the yolk to the pasta and milk, stirring all the time to stop it from scrambling. Pour the pasta into an oven-proof bowl and set it to one side. Whisk the egg white into stiff peaks and add the caster sugar to make a meringue. Pipe the meringue, it should be thicker than mine, onto the pasta and place in an oven at 180 degrees to cook until the meringue is golden brown on top. So I am weirdly looking forward to this. Obviously my piping skills leave quite a lot to be desired, because what I've basically done is create tiny meringue turds on here, and I think that Mary Berry wanted like rosettes or something a bit more refined, but we'll know for next time. So, chocolate pasta. That one's actually quite odd. It's very rich. The chocolate sauce is lovely. You know, it's just whole milk and chocolate powder, isn't it, really, and a bit of sugar, so there's nothing really to go wrong in that. And the meringue is good. And it's not overly sweet. So you still kind of get that wheaty flavour from the pasta shells that is still a strong flavour in this, along with the chocolate. And it works quite nicely because it's a very subtle, really not very sweet kind of flavour profile. Check me out. So that actually works quite nicely. I'm not sure that the texture or the medium is right, because it's soft, but it's still pasta. I don't know if it's just me not being able to get over the fact that we don't eat sweet pasta really in this country. So that's, you know, for me pasta is a main, it's savoury, and having it in this context is really throwing me, or if it is genuinely odd. I can't work out if it's me being uncultured, some sort of, you know, infidel that doesn't appreciate new exciting things. Maybe the people of the 70s were miles ahead of me in terms of their culinary tastes, but it's fine. I would eat it and I would make it again as a curiosity, but probably not as a dessert in its own right. Anyway, the 70s then. So yeah, not the best decade for food after all. Not as inedible as I was expecting it to be. Odd textures, odd presentations, but, you know, people of the 70s are still here, aren't they? So clearly not, you know, completely dire. And my mum and dad, I think, look back on their childhood with fondness, so there must be something good in the 70s that they enjoyed. Anyway, looking forward to the 80s with my shoulder pads and even bigger hair, and the culinary delights that come with the decade after this one. So I hope you'll join me next time on the Pasta's a Foreign Pantry.